All right, we're going to talk about two things today. One of them is Ajax, and I don't expect you to know it up, down, and sideways, but I think at least it's a good idea for you to sort of see how it's done. And if you had a chance to apply it in your project, that'd be cool, but don't obsess about it. The second thing is going to be something I probably should have did way earlier in the course, but it will be about, well, it'll be about use cases in a nutshell. And use cases are very useful when you design a project. Now, the horse kind of has left the barn on that one, right? You know, I would hope that you have a pretty good design for your project at this point. But the idea of use cases is also valuable as far as testing. So we'll talk about them from those perspectives. Let me download the example that I want to do something with. Now, what was I going to say? Oh, Thursday. Thursday will be an all-work day, which means we'll not be in here, we'll be in lab. And when I get to the section on use cases, I'll probably spend a minute talking about some things that you can do that Thursday, other than just working on your labs and assignments. All right. Does anyone know what is meant by Ajax? If you're really old, you'll remember the Ajax is stronger than dirt commercial. But I'd be surprised if anyone remembered that other than me. Ajax is not a programming language. Ajax is simply a way of the client and the server communicating in a more streamlined way, maybe, is a good way to put it, or in a more sophisticated way, in a less blocky, clunky sort of way. And let me talk about what I mean, and I'll show you what I think is like the classic example of it. Normally, when we talk about the client talking to the server, communication is done via pages, and pages are transferred from the client, from the server to the client. Whole web pages. So, when you have a client connected to the internet, that's connected to a server. When the client makes a request, again, they give they give other stuff. They give a URL, they give form data, and other info. That makes it to the internet, to the server. The server runs probably some server-side scripting, probably interacts with the database, creates on the fly an HTML document, which again contains HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. This is sort of the traditional model of the web, a request and a response. And the request and response is the request is for a complete web page, and the response is a complete web page. Now, we also get delivered back JavaScript, remember, so that we can do some interactivity on the page. So things like mouse over menu effects, where you put your mouse over something and a submenu appears. That does not require a trip back to the server. Because really what happened is the server gave you all those submenus and the CSS just hit them. So the server gave you the HTML for all those menus that are not visible, and the CSS just hit them, and the JavaScript gives you the interactivity, makes you show and hide them based on whether you have your mouse over it or mouse out of it. The next time you communicate with the server, whether you click a link, submit a form, type in a URL, the same process repeats itself. Your request goes through the internet, makes it to the server, and the server gives you back a whole web page. Now, that is sort of the traditional model where you're requesting and getting responded to with complete web pages. With Ajax, you're able to update the page with data from the server without getting a complete web page back. What do you get back? You get back a piece of data. And that data is used to update the page. So in an Ajax situation, your initial request will be for a web page. And the initial response will be a web page. You then make little mini requests, sort of. The specific kind of requests you have are called XML Http requests. These are HTTP requests. These are XML Http requests, which is slightly misleading because XML may or may not be involved in the response, but that's what it's called. The big difference between this is when you make an HTTP request, you get back a complete web page. When you make an XML HTTP request, and again, it's to a URL, and it can contain form data, and so on, usually this request is made via JavaScript. So there's JavaScript code that makes the request, goes to the server responds with just a chunk of data. Which might be an XML or JSON or other data formats. And this chunk of data is taken with JavaScript and used to update an existing page. You probably have all seen examples of this behavior, and you might not think of it. But if, for example, you open your Gmail account and just let it sit on the screen, all right? Don't do anything. If someone sends you an email, boom, your screen gets updated, and it shows you have gotten a new email. That happened without going back and requesting a complete page. Well, in the Gmail page, again, don't know the exact details of how it's done, but conceptually there's some JavaScript that fires off every once in a while, asks the server, have you gotten any new data? If the server gets any data, boom, it sends back the email that you've received, and that's used to update your page. All right. So again, difference, the initial is for a whole web page. The secondary HTML HTTP request simply asks for some data, gets it back, and JavaScript formats it. So JavaScript is heavily involved in this process because JavaScript typically initiates the request and JavaScript deals with the response back. Ajax stands for asynchronous. JavaScript and XML. Asynchronous means it doesn't have to wait for it to happen. In other words, that request is sent out. When the server gets a chance to respond, the server will respond. And the client isn't sitting there waiting for it. The client gets notified that, hey, here's your data. And then it deals with it. So that's what asynchronous means. You know, synchronous communication would be like a phone call conversation where two people are talking and one person talks, then waits for the second person to respond, and then talks, and so on. Whereas asynchronous communication would be more like leaving voicemail messages, right? You can leave me a voicemail message now. That doesn't mean that immediately I'm going to answer it. I'll answer it when I'm capable of answering it, and I go and call and leave you a voicemail message, and so on. So we don't have to be there at the same time. So that's what asynchronous means. Same thing here. Client makes a request. It doesn't sit around waiting for the response. When there's a response, it gets notified. And that'd be like the little light going off on your answering machine or something like that. Okay, let me show you an example of Ajax, which is sort of a classic example. And let me show you an example that's not Ajax. All right, I'm going to go and I'm going to hit refresh. Just to show you that this page, even on a fast connection, takes a little bit of time to appear. All right, and if we were on a slower connection, it would take even longer. You're actually downloading, in addition to all the stuff that you see, you're actually downloading some content that's hidden, namely the submenus. So if I put the mouse over NFL, I see a submenu for NFL, NBA, Major League Baseball, and so on. Now this could be done a couple different ways, so I'm just describing conceptually the behavior. I don't know the details of exactly how this is accomplished. I know for sure, though, that this is happening client-side. All right? Because it happens instantaneously. And I'm not getting the whole page refreshing itself. All right? Could you imagine how clunky it would be if every time you went and wanted a menu that the page had to go and completely reload? That would really be unworkable for this. So what happens is when you request a page, you get HTML that includes stuff that you don't see. You get CSS that hides that stuff, and there's probably JavaScript that shows and hides it based on that. So this is not Ajax, because all the interactivity I'm showing you happens on the client side. The model is still, for this, the model is still the traditional make a request, get back a complete page. All right? So if I want to see another page and I click on that, boom, I went and I requested a brand new page and I got back a brand new page. All right. Now here's an Ajax example. If I go to Google, notice as I type stuff in, I get back like the 10 most common search terms that starts with those letters. So if I type in an A, I get the 10 most popular search terms that start with the letter A. Amazon American Eagle, Amazon Cyber Monday, Amanda Bynes. Amanda Bynes is in the top 10 for A's. Number 4. It's amazing.
That's because she's like crazy now.
Well, but it's like in the last week or so. I mean, I can understand Amazon Cyber Monday, but still, it's kind of hard to believe. But anyhow, I digress. If I type in the next letter, AS, it shows me the next popular. And again, notice that it's showing me this like, notice it's showing me things like that are localized. For example, Ashland University. I doubt that worldwide, Ashland University would be number 2. But in this area of the country, Ashland's number 2. If I type in P, Aspen data, Asperger's, aspirin, asparagus, aspiration, finally a dot, okay, now we're getting ASP.NET. Now, we know something different is happening here. How do we know that this is different than the ESPN example? How do we know that that ESPN example is probably just pure JavaScript where this is an Ajax application?
It's dynamic.
It's dynamic. Well, the other one is kind of dynamic too, right? Because it shows and hides. So I think you're on the right track, but let's just get a little more details.
It's data.
It's data, okay? And what does that, what's the implication of that?
When would seem like it's just going down the list, looking at the characters or whatever,
Okay.
and it's sending back, this is what we have.
Okay. How do we know that, and this may be a dumb question, how do we know that all this information wasn't downloaded to the client just like all the menus were downloaded to the client in the ESPN example?
Speed.
Pardon me?
How fast it loads.
Well, the speed, yeah. How else do we know that this isn't how do we know that everything isn't happening in JavaScript, like here? This is fast too, right? How do we know that all that stuff didn't get downloaded to the client? Because that would mean that like every combination of letters that you could type in would have had to have gotten downloaded to the client. Because it doesn't matter what I type in, it brings me up a list of those things. I can type in ZELLERS. I didn't make the top 10. Darn. All right. I could type in CISS243. Well, that's the only selection. I can type in snow, and so on. Doesn't matter what I type in. In other words, if this functionality was done on client side, then when I loaded this Google page, I would have had to get the entire Google database with me, right? And clearly, that's not something that's practical. So servers usually, their purpose is to serve up stuff, is to serve data. And therefore, I can reasonably assure that there's no way that they could send all that data all at once on this page, like ESPN can send all those menus. Because all those menus really isn't that much. There's what? There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 extra menus. 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. There's 13 extra menus. That's not that big a deal, right? So it can send me 13 little chunks of HTML all at once, even if I don't use them. It's no real big deal. But for Google to send all that stuff at once would be preposterous. You simply couldn't have that happen. Therefore, you know that it didn't send everything at once. Well, if it didn't send everything at once, then what's happening? As I'm typing in, a request is made to the server that says, hey, I typed in A. Give me everything that starts with, give me the top 10 choices, rather, that start with the letter A. I type in S. Give me the top 10 choices that start with the letter S. And so on down the line. Okay? So, I know that this is a combination of client and server coding. Now notice, as I type stuff in, it's not refreshing the whole page. We don't notice a little flicker like that when we go to a new page. It's simply updating the page. So what happens is, as we type in, JavaScript makes that XML HTTP request to the server. The server thinks about it, sends back the top 10 items that relate to that search, and JavaScript redraws just this part of the screen. All right? And it does that over and over and over. So no matter what we type in, it will pull up the top 10 search options for that term. So there's simply too much possible data that could appear here for it to be sent all at once. So we're asking the server for that. We're getting back just that data, and JavaScript is drawing the page. This, in my mind, is sort of the classic example, because you can't imagine that when I download the Google homepage, I get the entire Google database of billions of websites and search terms and things like that, right? That's not even an option, right? How many things have people ever searched for in Google? Yeah, literally in the billions, I would say. All right, so that's Ajax in a nutshell. How do we do it in ASP.NET? Well, if you were doing it manually, in ASP.NET. And like some of you, are some of you in CISS232? Okay, we've done it manually in CISS232, where you create objects in JavaScript. You create a request object and you send a request to the web server. The web server sends back some data and there's JavaScript to format it. Fortunately, in .NET, there's components that do a lot of that work for you, that sort of isolate you from having to deal with the nuts and bolts. And I hope I remember how to do this, because it's probably been exactly 1 year since I've done this, like last time in fall 2017 that I actually did this live. So I hope I remember how to do this. So let's open up and let's make an Ajax page with our college website. So here's our college website. I'm going to do just a simple name search, all right, where we search for a faculty person by name, but I'm going to do it as an Ajax page. And I'm not going to go through the whole process of creating a bunch of other stuff on the page. I'll inherit from the master page. But again, keep in mind that we're just going to be updating a part of the page, so we won't notice the whole page reload. So I'll go up to here, File, New, File. I'll create a web form, and I'll call it Ajax. Search. Select master page. All right. So Ajax Extensions. I'm just going to do like the simplest bare bones example possible. First of all, I need a script manager object. I'm going to drag that guy on there. All right. I don't think we even need to worry about doing any code. I think we can do this without customizing this at all. And I'm going to get an update panel and put an update panel here on the page. Now let me tell you about an update panel. Any submit that you do inside an update panel is going to get treated as an Ajax request. So it's going to send code to the server just to pull certain data without refreshing the whole page. So in other words, if this page was done, if Google was done in ASP.NET, this would be in the update panel, because that's the part of the page that gets updated via the data that you're getting back from the server. So I'm going to put in the update panel a text box, and a button, and a data source, and a grid view. Now this is where we have to do our magic, right? Go to Server Explorer. Right mouse, say Add Connection. Those of you with sensitive ears might want to close them for a second. as I curse. And I forgot to save it. So yeah, I will try this one more time. And if it doesn't work, I will do an interpretive dance to show you how the rest of it works. So for all our sakes, I hope this works.
I wonder if that's why it froze. Was that you didn't say it? It could be.
Right. Could very well be end of task. Okay. We'll try one more time.
Or maybe it was because you didn't have the database open.
That's possible. Let's open a database. This is where superstitions come from, by the way. I'm sure that, like, if I do something now and it works, I'm going to be convinced that whatever I did is what made it work, even if it is, you know, something that isn't logical. Like if I use my left hand on the mouse or something, it's like, well, that's what made it work, right? Obviously. Okay, so let's try this one more time. So the database is open. I am going to open my project. Ajax search. Pin this down. Let me put Ajax stuff on it. So I'll put the script manager. And I'll put the update panel. And I will put SQL data source. You know what? I am not going to use a SQL data source. You all know how to use a SQL data source, and you all know how to link it to a grid view. I'm going to do something else. All right. I am going to generate a random number. All right. So I'm just going to generate all the. I'm just going to generate. All right. Put here a label and a button. All right. I'm going to do double click on this. That creates my button click event. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to generate a random number. So how do I generate a random number? Good question. Double random equals math dot random times 100. Okay, that's not it. I think that's how you do it in Java. C# generate random number okay. This is how sometimes professors grade stuff when it's near the end of the semester, and they're not, you know. So we'll generate a random number between 0 and 100. And I'm going to go label 1 text, label 1 dot text, Label 3. Oh, there's labels on the master page. Okay. Label 3 dot text equals how do I convert an integer to a string? I really wonder if like half these Stack Overflow stuff are students trying to do their homework. How do I convert to string? Okay, simple enough. All right, so again, in a more realistic example, this would do the search, right? This would, I would have a text box, I'd have a data source that had a parameter that got plugged in from the text box, and then I'd bind the grid view to the data source. But this will work too. All I want to have is I want to have some code that runs on the server. So I'm going to go and run this page, set it as my start page, and run it. First request is going to request and get it back an HTML page. All right, that'll be the entire Ajax search.aspx page with everything on it. Each subsequent request is going to simply request data for that Ajax panel. All right, there they are. So the first request. So notice that when the whole page loads, you get a little flicker there. So now I'm going to submit it. Notice no flicker whatsoever. It's not going back and asking for an entire page. It's just updating that section. So we did do a search. We did have a search there. All right. The same thing would happen when we clicked on the button. All right. It would not update that. I'm going to try one last time to get the search to work. And if that doesn't work, then we'll go on to the next topic. Because although this does illustrate the point, it might be a little more vivid if I use a more realistic example. So let's close these tabs. Let's go back here. Let me save this first of all. Let me go put a text box, a button, a grid view, and a SQL data source. And I'm going to put this stuff in its own paragraph. Okay. So there we go. All right, I'm going to save this. We're going to try to Server Explorer.
I saw on the database that the enable content. I think you might want to do that as well.
Okay, excellent.
Now I think you're good.
Okay, so click Data Connections, add connection. I'm getting excited. Yay.
Nice.
Configure data source, connection. faculty. We'll select everything from faculty. Where last name like where are we getting it from? We're getting it from a form control. And what form field? Text 1, text box 1, all right? Okay. All right. I'm going to go bind this to that. And again, run this. First time we request it, again, we're going to get the whole page. All right. Now when I go and type something in here, it runs out, does that search. And doesn't work. Text box 1. Is that what it's called? It is what it's called. Alright, I don't know what's going on, but that should work. Alright. I want to be sure to cover the use cases, so we'll leave it at that. I'm not really sure why. I will aim to fix this, and when I do, I'll publish the results for it. I'm trying to think. I don't know off the top of my head why that wouldn't be working. But I will look at, I will aim to get a solution to this, but I don't want to talk about this now. I want to go on to the next topic. And I'll post the results to this. Okay, next topic, use cases. Use cases, has anyone heard that term before? What do you think a use case is? What does that name sort of sound like to you?
Test case.
Test case, all right. You definitely want to test your use cases. So your use cases sort of become your test cases. So what would be an example of if your job was to test Amazon, what would be an example of a use case? Yeah. It would be something, an example of a use case would be something like this. All right? A typical thing that a user would do on the site. That's all a use case really is. So, Amazon. One example use case might be a current user for Amazon wants to buy a product. All right? With standard shipping. All right? That might be one use case. Another use case might be a Amazon Prime member wants to buy a product. All right. A third use case might be a user creates a new Amazon account. A new user creates an Amazon account. A fourth use case might be someone signs up for Amazon Prime. Next use case might be someone cancels an order, and so on down the line. So use cases are typical things that people want to do for your site. And normally they're defined when you design the system. In other words, what is your system going to be? All right? Who wants to be brave and describe something about your project? Who wants to be the guinea pig here to discuss your project? We can all rock, paper, and scissors if you want. 7-way. Okay, sure. Can you describe your project?
Just having like an employee list where someone can queue all the results for all the employees for a company and all their details.
Okay, so what might be an example for a use case in that scenario?
Someone needing to update.
Someone needing to update user information or employee information. That would be a great example of a use case. Adding a new employee, deleting an employee, viewing the details of an existing employee. All these things, when you're creating a website, you think of these things. Like, what do people want and what do people need to do on this website to do the job? So you define your use cases when you're designing. Again, we're a little late for that because hopefully you have a design of your project. But you can now think of them as test cases. So what are you going to test? You should have a use case for, I want to add a new employee. What are the steps that someone has to go through? All right. What are the possible outcomes? Because there's not always just one outcome to a use case, right? For example, if I try to register on Amazon, one outcome might be I register. One outcome might be I've supplied incomplete data, therefore I cannot register. A third outcome might be I've tried to create an account and there's already an account for that email address. I forgot that I had created an Amazon account. All right. A fourth use case could be the Amazon database is down when I tried to register. All right. So for every use case, there's possible outcomes, and you should try to test all of them. All right. Let me tell you, there's sort of 3 groups that projects fall into in this course. All right. And sometimes there's like crossing over, like you can't necessarily put a project in one of these categories. Sometimes a project's a little of this one, a little of this one, a little of that one. All right, but generally I have 3 observations of things. One is, we'll do the good news first. All right, works pretty well. All right, not really a lot to say about that, right? Those are the easy ones to grade, right? Because you look, you go in. This website allows me to search for music lyrics. So I type in music lyrics and boom, there comes a song that it's in. I click on the artist, I see other songs in there. You know, it's like it just does everything it was supposed to do. You know, that's great. Second one is it works, but and usually there's one of 2 things. There's blow-ups, or hard to follow flow. And we'll come back to this one. And the third one is that there are a lot of issues. Doesn't really work. Like mentally, when I get a project, these are like the things that I see. I guess the fourth one is, that there really isn't much there at all. There's only maybe a one page or something like that. So, I would think most people are going to fall in this category. Most assignments fall into this category. The assignments that fall in here are great. They work, great. Good job, probably 20 out of 20. Maybe if there's a little bit of an issue, you forgot validation on a page, okay, 19.5, 19, whatever. All right, but you got a really good grade. This one, obviously there's big problems, and either you didn't understand something, didn't devote sufficient time, need to review something with me. If you fear you're in this category, you should be talking to me, all right, and talking to me now. Now, here's the thing. I would love to see people in this category elevate to this category, all right? And largely is a matter of testing that's going to get you from this category to that category. Test a bunch of stuff. Test for blow-ups. Test what happens if you go to a page. Don't enter any data and hit submit. I guarantee any page that you have that inserts to the database, I'm going to open up, I'm not going to enter any data in, and I'm going to click submit. All right? And I should get probably an error message. A nice error message, not some ugly database error message. All right? So test every contingency you can think of. Remember, people don't get a manual when they visit a website. People don't go to training classes. People just start using a website, and websites ought to be designed in such a way that it's possible to do that it's intuitive. You don't have to go to a training class to use Facebook or Gmail or whatever. You just pick it up. So this usually means inadequate testing or maybe ran out of time. This one, in a way, is the most interesting one. So that's what I'm going to talk about. Because in this case, strictly speaking, it works. You can't go in and insert an employee, for example. But the manner in which you do it is very awkward. For instance, if you remember how we did the default details view. When we use the default details view, how do you insert something? You go to the page, you call up an existing person, and then you click insert. That's clunky. I shouldn't have to view an existing employee to insert a new one. All right? That's where, strictly speaking, the code works, but the workflow wasn't designed with usability in mind. All right? So the workflow wasn't defined with usability in mind. So think of this is where it comes full circle. All right? Think of your use cases. Think of your common things. All right? And you can do it, or you guys can trade off and trade out projects. Look at each person's project. Each person define some use cases and say, maybe you and you trade, all right? And you'll tell him, all right, what you want to be able to do is go and look up the stats for this player that plays for this team. And they should have a logical way to do that, and it should be intuitive to them. Just because they can do it doesn't mean that the flow is good and the design is good. Oftentimes this is simply writing good navigation or having logical organization or taking a few extra minutes to customize the default code to work the way that you really want it to, instead of just letting the .NET framework decide how it's going to work. All right? So that's my suggestion for Thursday. It's a work day, so you can work on your stuff. But I would hope you'd all be far enough along where you can spend a few minutes working with another person in class, looking at their site, and trying to do some work cases, use cases. All right? Because imagine me, poor me, having to grade these things. Right? I open them up. I want to go in and I want to give you credit for the work that you've done. It's not like I'm looking for problems. But if your website, I'm supposed to be able to compare two players, I want to go in and see, this is how you do it. Okay, here's a link that says compare two players. I click on it. There's a drop down for player 1, a drop down for player 2. I select them, boom, there you go. I'm ecstatic when that happens. Because what you set it out to do, not only technically does it work, but it's intuitive. And I don't have to sit there and look through the code like, how do I compare? Oh, I have to click on this, and then click on that, and then click on that. All right? That's the kind of stuff that really drags your grade down and drags a project down. Because the sad truth is most bad websites don't have blow-ups or things like that. They're just really awkward to use. They haven't been created with those use cases or the user's goals in mind. So Thursday, do that. One other thing I would ask you to do, if you have a login, all right, tell me what login credentials will work. So ideally create mic and password, all right? But if you don't do that, display it on the screen that the user ID to use is mic and password, or Fred and password with a $sign, or whatever, all right? Display it on the screen. Because, again, I'm grading a bunch of things all at once. It's tough when I have to go look through databases, look through code, and all that to figure out what I need to do. Your home page should be called default.aspx. Now, I probably mentioned that earlier. Maybe I didn't emphasize it enough. If that isn't your home page, tell me what is your home page. Tell me my starting point, where I should go to when I initially go into your application. All right? So I shouldn't have to guess that, oh, search 1 is the first page or something like that. If I'm supposed to go to the login page, tell me the first page you should go to is login or whatever. All right? That's all I had for today. I will try to get a correction to the Ajax thing going. Does anyone now have questions about your project? Okay, we'll see you Thursday. Remember, Thursday we're coming directly to lab, all right, and we're working on this stuff in lab. All right, so we'll see you